My name is Jenny Bodine. I'm the Executive Director for Servants for Sight, and we help connect people that don't have insurance or means to pay for eyeglasses and cataract surgery to physicians locally in Greenville and in the upstate as well. Right now with this COVID thing, we are not able to do what we normally do. We're not able to do our vision screenings around town. We're not able to do our orientations, and our normally scheduled patients are not able to see the physicians. So in this time where we feel like we're really on pause, what has happened and what the story we're here to tell today is really an incredible story of what God is able to do and will continue to do regardless of our involvement and our intentionality. So we are just so excited and so blessed to continue to see God working through us, through connections, through people, through neighbors, and through His Word to bring Him glory, to bring sight, both physical and spiritual sight, so that people can enjoy life here now and, of course, bring Him glory and bring people into His kingdom.
How did we end up in the community, and what were we doing out there? And that's interesting because one of the elders in our church and our pastor and I were talking about, it's kind of crazy. We have a real small church and it's in Clemson, and it's it's in the community, but we don't know the community. A lot of us live outside of the community, and there's just probably stuff happening around us. We've tried a few little outreaches. We've done something called Taste and See. It's off the verse in the Psalms that says, "Taste and see that the Lord is good." And so we bought fresh veggies, and it was the idea of one of our youth, and fruits and vegetables at Trader Joe's once a month. And we would go out in the community and just find somebody that looked like they needed some groceries and give them to them. But we were having this discussion that day, and we said, Jesus, there's like one sermon in the Bible, but there's all kinds of stories of His healing and of His ministering and of His touching lives and one-on-one and people leaving changed. And, so the pastor said, why don't we go door to door? And we said, well, we'll be labeled as a particular group that does that a lot. And he says, I don't care. And I says, well, I don't either. And so the elder and the pastor and my wife and I decided we would just go out in the community and just see if anybody needed some prayer or some encouragement or something like that. Try to, we know Jesus when we read about Him. He desired the good in everyone, publicans and sinners, and they ate with Him, and He didn't make them feel like they couldn't be around Him. He desired their good. He sympathized with them. He didn't condemn them, and he ministered to them and won their confidence, and ultimately many of them followed Him. So with that kind of in mind, we went out, and I think the pastor and the elder went to about 30 places, and they had a fun time. My wife and I ended up only going to 2 places. We ran into this lady. I don't want to go on and on here too long, but we ran into this lady that had a lot of need. And she had like 6 kids, and her neighbor had come on hard times and had moved in, and she had no husband. And anyway, so we spent probably an hour there. And we thought, well, we have a little more time. We had set aside 2 hours. And we knocked on a couple more doors. Nobody was home. And we knocked on this door, random. And a young lady came to the door, and a very lovely mid-20s or so young lady. And turns out she was a PhD student at Clemson and from Thailand. And she stepped to the door and she said hi. And I didn't have, we'd only been to one door, and I really didn't know what to say. And I was like leaning on my wife, maybe you need to talk a little bit. So. And so before we could even get our words out, like, why are we there? How do you introduce that? Like, do you need prayer? But anyway, we went to the door, and she looked at us, she says, are you guys Christians? And I kind of played with her a little bit. I said, do I do I look like it? I wasn't wearing a jacket. I was in jeans, and so, and she says, "Are you Christians?" And I said, "Yes." And she says, "Well, I'm Buddhist and I'm not converting," and she shut the door. So that was our introduction to Rika. And but before the door shut, I just blurted out, and I said, "We're not here to convert you," because she said, I don't want to be converted. I said, "We're not here to convert you." And she opened the door and she said, "You're not?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Then why are you here?" And I said, "It's just crazy. We are Christians." And it's interesting that you should say that. But we're from the church, this stone church right down the street. And we really just don't know our community and whether there's needs and whether there's people sick or whether there's, people in affliction of some kind. And we just didn't know if people need prayer. And that's why we knocked on your door. And she says, "I'm fine, but I know someone who needs help." And we said, "Tell us who it is." And she gave us the name that we had never heard of, Doug Moline, and we asked for his address. She gave us his address. It wasn't like right next door. It was a few streets away. And we said, "How do you know him?" And she said, "Well, he's done some work for me, but he lost his vision. He lost his sight. And he's not able to work for me anymore." And she says, "I have a few properties, and he's just done work for me on these properties." So we said, "Okay, we'll go see him." Sorry. So, there we go. Shouldn't happen again. I should have thought of that.
That's okay.
So, to get back on track here for a minute, give you a little work to do in your editing. But anyway, she said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a nurse, but I've really retired, and my wife and I work together. We work full-time in missions." She said, "What kind of missions?" And I said, "Well, it's kind of medical mission, kind of what we're doing here. We just look for ways to help people." And she said, "Where?" And I said, "Cuba." And she said, "I want to go to Cuba." Well, long story short, we talked an hour with her, and we've had dinner with her, and it's just a really cool kind of growing relationship, and she's very, very thrilled that we had the opportunity to meet Doug. So let me jump into a few minutes after Rika's house. We drove straight to this address, and she said he may not come to the door because he's blind. Some people have taken advantage from him. Some have even stolen things from him, and he's going to be very weary, but you tell him that I sent you. So we went to the door and we knocked, and Doug came to the door and said, "What do you want?" And we said, "Well, we just heard that you had some needs," and he said, "Did Rika send you?" And we said, "Yes." And he says, "Okay." And he opened up the door and we talked. And we had no idea that there would be any way that the Lord could use us to connect Doug with somebody that could help him. But from the story from there, and I don't want to go on too long here, but the story from there was just absolutely amazing. We had been in the community. I had been in the hospital, had been responsible for surgery and some other departments of the hospital. And so I knew all the surgeons, and in the early days when Dr. Precy came from Canada and joined the practice of Bob Brown, they were doing all their surgery at the hospital before he built his own center and started working out of surgery centers. And so I knew him, and I had known his wife a little bit, and I found her number and sent a message and asked, "Would you see Doug?" Doug has not been to anyone. Finally, after a couple years of blindness, and I want Doug to tell that story, but after a couple years of blindness, he was able to get some help because he couldn't have an income. And so Rika actually was one of the ones who helped him get disability and took him down to the office and et cetera. Was very, very caring young lady. But they didn't do a complete medical exam, and they had written on the sheet glaucoma. And I thought, if he's blind from glaucoma, there's no reversing this. It's going to be permanent. But we still thought, man, it would be awful not to just check, just see, you know? And I happen to respect Dr. Parisi a lot, and he did a surgery on my mother that even MUSC, the top person there, said, I don't think anybody will touch that. It's very difficult. And he was successful, and so I particularly wanted him to look at Doug. And I had texted his wife, and she texted me back, and we got an appointment. A couple weeks went by, which I hate. I wish I would have done it the next day, but I've been very busy. And we got in on March 17. I'd never heard of Servants for Sight. My wife was asking me, how are we going to help Doug? What if he needs surgery and he can have surgery? What will we do? Where will we find the money for that? And I just kept telling her, I don't know. I have no clue, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. That doesn't, somebody will help. God will send somebody. And he put us in contact with Doug. Let's just not worry about it. So we had this appointment, and they checked the pressures in his eyes looking for glaucoma, and they're normal. They're fine. And then they go to look in his eyes, and they can see nothing because they are so large and thick and mature cataracts that you couldn't see to see if the retina is damaged or if it's okay or any other structures of the eye. And then it began to dawn on us, well, Dr. Parisi, as he's just kind of talking to the nurse, as he's trying to look in the eye, and they even did an ultrasound so that they could just see the cavity, the orbit, and determine if the structure looks sound or not. They can't see everything. And he said to his nurse, who he was kind of dictating to, before we can do anything else, we've got to get these cataracts off so we can see in there. And I thought, there's hope, And then in the end, he talked to us, and he said, I can't tell you what's behind the cataracts because I can't see. But he needs to get them off, and there's a pretty good chance that he'll be able to see. And we said, wow. He says, there's no surgeries happening right now with COVID, and except emergency surgeries. But he said, in my opinion, this is an emergency. He said, this is a critical surgery. I will fight for that. And he said, are you familiar with Servants for Sight? And I said, who's Servants for Sight? And he said, well, it's a really awesome organization. They are located in Greenville, and they are just a group of really super people and caring, and they are very good at screening and seeing who really needs help and genuinely is a candidate to help. And some of us surgeons in the community respect so much what they do, we are happy to contribute and also be a part of working together with them to get something done. He said, I just really highly recommend you contact him right away. And so he gave us that number, and wow, it's just, I think you know the history from there, but it's an amazing experience. And I wonder, I think back about it, I got a text message this last week after Doug walked out, but to see Doug walk out of the surgery center and without his cane, as a matter of fact, he pretended to throw it, and he said, I'll never need this again. I thought you threw it in the bushes, Doug. And you know what I did after you left? I went back to the bushes and looked for it because I wanted to keep it, because it was just a reminder of just the coolest story of how really, I think the Lord just put this together between having an organization there ready to help and a physician willing to help. And just the thought of what was the work of Jesus like? And do we really reflect that today in Christianity? Do we really represent who he was? And if we did, would the world feel differently about Christianity than it does today? So with that thought, I'm very, very grateful for having had a little part. We just got to see it happen. We didn't really do anything, but just want to give God absolutely all the glory. Praise his name.
Well, my name is Douglas Jack Moline. I'm originally from Florida. My father worked out at the Space Center. We lived in Cocoa Beach. That's 2 towns away from the Space Center. But I grew up in the space age, and we were like 2 blocks from the ocean. We lived walking distance to the ocean, Atlantic Ocean, and I became a surfer and a sailor and all that typical Florida stuff. And it was all a learning experience for me, you know. And I had perfectly good sight at the time. And I never thought about being blind until I became blind. And now I know what it's like. But as a sailor, I was in a couple nationals, one in Key Biscayne, Florida, and one in California. And the first it was with a Hobie Cat catamaran sailboat. That's all I ever sailed, well, besides a monohull in the Bahamas and what have you. But anyway, my sailing experience was a joy to me and a learning experience. And you know, we sailed around manatees and porpoises and sharks. And, you know, it sounds a little bit scary, but not really. You know, and this is in the inland waterways and in the ocean, Atlantic Ocean. But anyway, in Key Biscayne, the first nationals I went to, I and my partner, my skipper actually, I was the crew. It's a 2-man boat, and we got 6th place. And that was in '73. But the first 5-place winners of the nationals got to have a paid vacation to Tahiti for the World Championships. Well, we didn't make it by one position. But anyway, and then in California we got 34th place, and this is out of 150 boats in the nationals. But anyway, that's a past experience, and I loved it, and it was part of me. But I was in construction mainly, carpenter, and you know, and it got to the point where I couldn't even read a tape measure anymore. But this was several years later when all this happened. I met my wife in Merritt Island, Florida, Cheryl, and her and I decided to move to South Carolina. So we moved up here. We bought a house, paid straight up for it, in a little town called Pendleton. And we lived there for 10 years. Now for me, it's been easily 12 years. But she passed away in 13. And at that time, my brother had come up from Florida, and we were participating in work together. Construction mainly, Planet Fitnesses, we were doing all kinds of stuff, carpentry. And eventually, my house caught on fire. It just partially burned. This was after my wife died, and my brother was living with me. And my back bedroom burned from an electrical problem. And luckily, the fire department came out and they got it out. I was standing outside with a garden hose, you know, until they got there. But they proceeded to extinguish the fire. It was a mess, you know. So Bob and I lived out in a trailer in my driveway for at least one winter. It was brutal. And
Could you see
Ab-
at that time?
yes, I could see. And when after all this, my brother ended up going back to Florida because he has a daughter and a grandson. And so I was still had my vision, and he took off, so I was all alone in the house. So then I had a friend that lived down the street who got evicted from his trailer. So I invited him to stay with me in my house. You know, I thought, well, I'm helping him out, you know, and he can. And at that time, my eyesight kept getting worse and worse. First, it was my left eye, and I just wore my patch on my right side. Because actually, I wore my patch on my bad eye, and my right eye I could still see fairly good. It was cloudy, but I still couldn't read a tape measure. So anyway, I took what I had, and this friend of mine, he helped me out to a certain degree. And then after a while, he turned out to kind of be a sour apple, and he just up and left. And so anyway, I was back to being alone again, and then my eyesight proceeded to get worse and worse and worse. And I really had no recourse. All I did was sit around in the house, you know, in the one room that we cleaned up after the fire and what have you. And I had a TV set I could listen to. You know, all I saw was a light. And
How did you meet Rika?
I was home one day listening to TV, and there was a knock on. Well, actually, I met her way before this when my brother was living with me. And after the fire, my brother and I kind of decided to move back to Florida. And when we decided to do that together, because we only had one car between us, we just took everything out of the house, you know, that we could salvage, because it was all covered with soot and what have you from the fire. You know, I sold the stove, sold the fridge, sold the water heater, which was under my house. My tools, we had a driveway sale. And during this driveway sale, we put signs out on the side of the road, you know, said moving sale, because we had intended to move back to Florida. So I was just selling everything, in the house, under the house, around the house. So after this, my brother just decided to up and go home, and I was still there, basically camping out. And the power, we had no power, and my neighbors, Jesus, my neighbor across the street, we pulled a cord, and I've been running off of his power until I can get power put back in the house. But he helped me out a lot. His family, they help me all the time. You know, if we need to go to the store or what have you. Especially when my eyesight I was walking with a cane. I couldn't even see anymore. You know, I had to bring them, and their daughter would be gracious enough to, you know, I'd hang on to the cart, and she'd walk me around the store, and she'd buy the groceries, or she'd point out, you know, I said what I'd want, cookies or what have you, you know. So anyway, they helped me out big time. And then Rika, back to how I met Rika, she had come to that yard sale that I had, and she bought my dining table. And that was the first time that my brother and I had met her. She just happened to read the sign on the side of the road, and she came by the driveway, and she liked my dining room table that I had sitting at the end of the driveway, you know, glass top table and everything. So she ended up buying that. And my brother and I ended up stuffing in her little car. She had just enough room to put this thing in her car. So anyway, before she left, my brother and I gave her our business card, which at that time was in construction work. And I hadn't heard from her for probably a half a year, maybe even a year. And then next thing I know, she calls me up, and I actually recognized her voice. You know, she didn't even say who it was after all that time. I said, "Is this Rika?" And she says, "Yes." And she says, "I have some work for you to do." So at that time, I could still see, partially. Well, I did like 3 or 4 jobs for Rika, and then my eyesight just totally, that was it.
So you couldn't work for her?
Yeah, she would come over and ask me if I could do some work. She has several different rental properties and stuff. And so I said, "Rika, I'm sorry, I cannot. I can't even read a tape measure." So then, so she kind of disappeared for a little while. And after this, I finally started receiving my disability. And then she kept coming over and trying to help me with getting the process of getting my eyes repaired, because I guess she liked my maintenance work,
Yeah.
my carpentry or what have you. But anyway, I said, "Well, I hardly even know you, Rika." And she kind of got offended a little bit, and I guess I was too forward, because I was hesitant at that time, because people, you know, they'd take stuff, and of course I couldn't see when they were even walking past me with it, you know. And
So tell me about the day that Henry knocked on your door.
and then, after I believe Henry told the main story about meeting Rika, which I didn't know at that time,
Yeah.
and he came to my door, and him and his wife, Arlene, and I opened the door, and I thought they were probably just, you know, those certain people that try to spread their religion at your doorstep. Well, I opened the door, and they started telling me who they were, and I said, and they said something to the fact that they had spoke with somebody that had told us that you were in need of possible help because of your situation. And I said, "Did you speak to Rika?" And they said yes. And so that's kind of how I got to that. And then ever since then, Henry and Arlene have stayed in constant contact. In fact, they took me to their church, the little stone church next to Publix. And at first, the first time I went there, it was for a whole week. Trying to think of the pastor, Earnhardt. And he was the pastor for a whole week. He was just a visiting for a whole week. And I went, they came, and Henry and Arlene came and got me. And they had to drive a long ways. You know, they lived Westminster as compared to Pelzer. And then the church is a little ways away from my house, maybe 3 miles. So anyway, I said, "Yes, sure, I'd love to go." So I ended up going, and it was very God-fulfilling. And then, go ahead.
So Henry and Arlene, or just Henry, took you to Clemson Eye for your appointment?
Yes, they knew about my problem, of course, and one day I was going to make an appointment because I heard about this Clemson eye clinic and Dr. Parisi. And so I made an appointment, you know, and I told Henry about it, and I had made the appointment already. So the next day, I think Henry called me, and I said, "Well, Henry, I made an appointment." And he's like ecstatic about it, and he says, "I'd love to take you. I know Dr. Parisi." And so I was like, "Well, that's great. Now I'm getting somewhere." with getting my vision back. And so Henry came, like he said, and picked me up. We went to the eye doctor, and I had my initial examination. And
How did it feel to know that it was possible for you to get your vision back?
well, at that time, I really didn't know, because I had heard that, and I wasn't sure whether what I had was what I had. Glaucoma, I was assuming it was glaucoma. And it turned out it wasn't. And I asked, when the doctor was looking at me, and at the end of the exam, I asked him, I said, well, just on a, actually, no, I asked him this. After the operation, I'd asked him, well, being that you corrected my one eye on a scale of 1 to 10, what was the status of my cataracts? And he said, well, it's probably on a scale of 7 to 8. And, I can't imagine it being 10. That would be blackout, I guess. But anyway, so that's what he told me. The exciting thing was, I had no idea what these people looked like. They all just sounded generous. Everybody was helping, finally. So then there's one way I can describe the operation. Needless to say, it was painless. Just the fact that I was awake. Of course, my eye was numbed out, and they proceeded to operate. And the way I could describe the operation as I'm laying there, as he's working on me, is looking through a painted pane of glass, and somebody on the other side taking a razor blade and scraping that paint off a little at a time, and finally, after he was basically close to finished, I could see him right above me. And that's the best way I can describe it. But what else was there about?
Just so you've had the surgery now, you get another surgery.
And yes, thanks. Actually, at our first initial examination at Dr. Parisi's office, after we had started to walk out, well, we got the bill, and Henry and I are standing there at the counter ready to walk out, and we're talking to everybody, and the lady shows us the bill, and written across it is no charge. We couldn't believe it. Just couldn't believe it. So anyway, finally, we got an appointment to have my second exam. Like Henry had said, they have to check the pressures and what have you, determine that it's really cataracts, I guess, or whatever. And it turned out, well, in my situation, it turned out to be a godsend. And after that surgery, thanks to y'all, that's Southern.
I like it.
I was able to see again. And here I am looking at you beautiful people. Thank you for Servants for Sight. I had no clue. Like I said, we were standing there at the counter, and Henry had stated that, talking to his wife, that they had no clue as to how they're going to help me, even though they said they were going to, in a way. And that's when I believe one of the ladies in the office had said something about Servants for Sight, or possibly it was the doctor that said that, I'm not sure. And like he said, he had no clue about Servants for Sight, and I did not either. So I ended up getting an application and filling it out and sending it off, and needless to say, within a couple days, I had a response, and it was wonderful. So
So your hope for the future now?
yes, and it's just beautiful to see green and everything again.
And to look forward to working again.
Yeah. And I'll get a haircut eventually. But
That's good.
yeah, it's a godsend, and I thought about it a lot about y'all, and I intend to be a donator to you.
To help somebody else.
That's correct.
Yeah.
To help somebody else, because it can be done. I was kind of in a hopeless state for a while, till I met Henry and Arlene. And of course, it was amazing that they actually went by Rika's just by chance. And then it just all came together. Thank God.
I'm Jennifer with Servants for Sight, and I am the patient approver. And during this COVID-19, we've been shut down in a lot of ways. But I received a phone call from a man named Henry, and he went on to tell me Doug's story. And I knew that this needed to happen quickly, and I knew that God was in control the way every step had happened, the way he met Rika, the way he was introduced to Doug. And so I was able to get the application in quickly, get it approved quickly, and then through my coworkers, we were able to contact Clemson Eye and reach out to Dr. Parisi, and it was within just a few days that Henry heard back that the surgery had been scheduled. So for me, it was just a small part I played, but I was so thankful to be able to help make it happen so that Doug could get his sight back. And like he said, get his life back. That we did so much more than just give him his sight, we gave him back his life. And to be a part of that is just why we do what we do at Servants for Sight. And it gives me so much joy to be able to be a part of these stories.
Doug and I have been thrilled over a lot of things. One of the thrilling things for me was seeing Doug walk out of the surgery center after surgery. And he wasn't being led. He wasn't holding anybody's arm. And I just couldn't hardly take it.
I didn't know what to think either.
And then on Easter Sunday, I got a text message from Dr. Parisi just saying, Happy Easter, Henry. How is our patient doing? Talking about you. Any problems at all, Joe? And I want to read the response that he told me to tell him. I called him and said, what do you want me to tell him? And this is what he said. I do not have words to share with Dr. Parisi for the kindness and favor he showed me and for the talent he has. By God's grace, he has performed a miracle. I'm not just good, I'm way beyond knowing what to say. It's like from night to day, from prison to freedom. It's amazing, and although my vision was quite fuzzy at first, I'm using the drops every day and it gets a little clearer and I can read a little smaller print. Just tell him that thank you is not sufficient. I want to say thank you by giving my life to doing something to help others. That's what you told me, and I know you meant it with all your heart.
Yes.
So let's tell him one of the things that you're going to do for us, and I
Work on your sailboat?
you're going to work on the sailboat.
Yeah, I
and
can't
I'm
wait.
excited. So my wife and I started 22 years ago a mission in Cuba, and we have a 501c3. It's called World Youth Group. And we work with a lot of youth. We take about 100 youth a year down to Cuba. We started in South America and then ended up the last 22 years we've been in Cuba. And we do kind of a little practical, we call it the practical gospel. It's a medical missionary work trying to help impoverished and people that are disenfranchised and not doing really great. So we got to thinking, we're sailors and we do a little sailing. We're not big sailors, but we're little sailors. But we like ocean sailing, and we like, the first year we ever sailed, we sailed to the Bahamas and back, and the next year 100 miles out, and the next year 300 miles out. And we just kept gaining kind of offshore ocean experience. And one day, the Lord, through a story I won't tell now, put it on our hearts that we need to combine youth and missions and sailing, that they go together. And we were like, what? And, but anyway, you know, youth need an experience, and sailing is a skill, and it requires a lot of order and discipline, and your things need to be together. And besides that, you leave all technology, you leave the world, gaming, friends, everything, and you get out and you're immersed completely in creation, salt air, seagulls, marine life, and time, lots of time. And so we just thought, wow, what a boot camp for missions. Not only do you learn a skill and whatever, and you're kind of disconnected from technology and the techie part of the world that we live in, but also you have time to mentor and time to prepare for the work ahead, so that when you arrive at a destination, you are a little more prepared to jump in and try to be a blessing and try to represent Christ. So would you know it, having no idea that Douglas Moline was not only just a Hobie Cat sailor, but a Hobie Cat champion in Florida, and even entered the Nationals and did pretty well. He said, I want to help you on your boat. We said, like, what? He says, we're constructing this boat. I wish I could pop up a picture and show you, but I want to help you on this boat. So today, after this interview, where are we heading, Doug?
Gonna go check out the boat.
We're going to go see it. We got a couple people working today, and I should be there too. And let's go, Doug. Let's go see what we can get done.
It'll be exciting.
Yeah, it'll be exciting. And maybe the first passage to Cuba, I'm going to need a mate on that passage. We'll talk about it.
I'll stand at the bow whenever I'm requested.
Okay, and look for coral heads.
Coral heads.
Exactly. Okay, so that's the story of the boat, and we hope it'll be a blessing. We really don't know why we're doing it, but God has put it in our heart this is going to be a part of the ministry. So
I can't wait.
we're trying.